right? Now, prior to 1948, that first clause was considered controlling, right? Because we need a well-regulated militia, you can have a gun, right? Which means you can have a gun to the extent that we need a well-regulated militia and you can serve in it, right? Since then, the court has increasingly read it to mean you have a right to own a gun, right? And this was manageable for a time, and I'm not really sure what changed in the 70s and 80s with the NRA. I really don't know. I grew up in Hollowell, Maine, okay? Everybody I knew hunted. Everybody hunted. There were guns everywhere. And everybody belonged to the NRA. And the NRA ran gun safety seminars, and it ran sporting shows, and it did all kinds of education, and every single one of those people was in favor of reasonable gun control. Right? I don't know a person who would suggest that you go hunting with anything other than a single bolt-action rifle. Right? Automatic rifles to go hunting deer? Are you out of your mind? Right? Do you need an assault weapon? You couldn't kill a deer with an assault weapon. Those little tiny bullets, you could shoot 200 of them, you wouldn't kill the deer. It's not a hunting weapon. It's an anti-personnel weapon. That's the only reason it exists. Right? At some point, the NRA went from being a lobby for gun enthusiasts, right, and hunters and gun safety, and became wackos. I mean, I'm sorry. This is just completely extreme, right? After the Oklahoma City bombing, right, Congress tried to pass legislation that would put a chemical tag in smokeless black powder, whose only purpose, I believe, was to create explosives. The NRA lobbied against that and successfully got that removed. Right? Why would a gun lobby argue against a chemical tag for something that could only be used for essentially a terrorist attack? Why? I don't get it. Why do they think you should have the right to own an Uzi or an AK-47? Why are they upset about background checks? Right? I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't.
I think it's part and parcel of the, again, moving to the extremes, as far as the NRA's role in politics. I will say, to the question, it's one of the sort of, essential questions about the Constitution, and, is it a living, evolving document, or is it dead? Anthony Scalia said it's dead. There's not a lot of room for interpretation. It says what it means what it says. I don't agree with that. I think that it is a fantastic guideline for how government operates and how we run a country, but it was a product of its time. It was, as I mentioned before, written by white male landowners who didn't think women should be able to vote. The idea of black people voting, is just, it's like the idea of dogs talking to them. It was something that they could not even comprehend, let alone would ever go along with. They didn't think they only thought you should be able to vote if you own property. So when you understand it comes out of that context, I don't think you could say that it's, you have to interpret its literal meanings. I think it sort of, it provides us a guidepost, but I think it is an evolving document. One of the amendments, was it the Third Amendment, talks about quartering troops. That's really not a concern for us right now. And obviously there's a process in place to amend the Constitution too. And, there have been plenty of amendments to it. And that is the genius of it, is that it, by virtue of the amendment process, it was conceived to be a document that could change and could evolve. And that's what it's done. So it's probably because of the gridlock and the extremism we talked about, it's probably now more difficult than ever to ever amend the Constitution. I saw that retired Justice John Paul Stevens today called for that we should, repeal the Second Amendment. That will never happen. The fact that it's even being talked about is sort of never happened in any of our lifetimes. I don't think, maybe some of the younger people's lifetimes. But it's also not necessary. Even if you are let's say that you are a real advocate for gun control, more stricter gun control, you don't need to repeal the Second Amendment in order to do that. And Matt talked about the way that it used to be perceived. I mean, Congress can pass laws within even the current interpretation that the Supreme Court has laid down in the Second Amendment that would address a lot of the gun safety concerns that people would like to see addressed if Congress had the will to do it. That's the question. Does Congress have the